to this important intervention press conference from here. I'm here today to announce to you measures to address the economic difficulties we are facing due mainly to recent global and domestic events. These difficulties have manifested in rising fuel prices, rising inflation and cost of living, exchange rate depreciation, rising interest rates, and revenue mobilization challenges. Government had its first regular quarterly retreat for 2022 from 18th to 20th March at Pejuase, concluding in Accra on Monday, the 21st of March. During the retreat, Cabinet deliberated extensively on a number of issues and approved a number of measures to support current efforts to address the challenges we are facing. Also on Monday, March the 21st, 2022, the Bank of Ghana announced a number of complementary monetary measures to address the rising cost of goods and services on the market and the worrying performance of the cedi against major currencies. Ladies and gentlemen, it's important to stress right from the onset that the difficulties we are facing in Ghana are not peculiar to Ghana. It should also be stressed that several governments in both developed and developing countries are busily coming out with various prescriptions to bring the economies back to work and on track. After the devastating impact of COVID-19, which distorted global supply chains and the ongoing Russia-Ukraine war. If we look at the world today, there are two clear forces shaping global events: the impact of the novel coronavirus pandemic and the crisis in Ukraine. With the virus, the records show that our decision to focus first on protecting lives and then livelihoods has paid off. By February, globally, some 7.03% of those infected by COVID-19 had died. For Africa, the figure was 4.03%, about 251,444 people. In comparison, less than 0.89%, that is 1,445 people of infected people in Ghana died. May their souls rest in peace. Against all odds, but due to firm leadership, bold initiative, and responsive citizens, Ghana has so far collectively managed the virus remarkably well. But we knew that Ghana, like most countries in the world, had a tall list of coronavirus-induced bills to pay from 2020 and 2021, and came out of plans and policies to boost investor confidence and job prospects for 2022 and beyond.
And the finance minister has been given an update on the measures that will be announced to mitigate the hardship being experienced in the country. He stressed that the events that we are experiencing are due to two major issues: domestic and external events. He indicated that fuel price hikes, depreciating cedi, upsurging inflation and interest rates, as well as challenges with revenue mobilization, have compounded the difficulties many of us are experiencing. He indicated also that the measures that he will announce today will not be peculiar to Ghana, because many countries have been going through these difficulties and are announcing same to bring the economy back. Let's go back to that coverage now.
The rail sector to do just that. Our 10 billion Ghana Youth Start program will be the most historic intervention for youth employment in our country. However, three things that we did not and could not predict hit us. That, one, that Parliament will approve government's 2022 budget statement, the appropriation and its expenditure plans, and then turn around to vote against one of the key revenue generation measures that was being introduced, the e-levy. That the unyielding stance of the minority in Parliament against the e-levy would gravely affect investor confidence in our capacity to implement our programs and settle our debts, triggering a downgrading by credit rating agencies, and now leaving the cedi vulnerable as we could not access the international capital markets. Ladies and gentlemen, the third hit was the launch of the attack on Ukraine by Russia on February 24, 2022. The war in Ukraine could not have come at a worse time for the global economy. Already, global efforts towards economic recovery from the devastation wreaked by the coronavirus pandemic were being disturbed by supply chain disruptions, surging inflation, and uncertainties in the financial markets with anticipated hikes in interest rates. After February 24, we saw a sharp hike in global oil prices, food prices shocks, especially wheat, oil and gas price hikes, capital risks, aversion, flight to safety by 75.3% from $74.17 in December 2021 when the 2022 budget was passed, to $130 on 7th March 2022 before moderating to $115 as of today. Crude oil prices crossed the $100 mark for the first time since September 2014. We recall that prior to the pandemic, we had built resilience through the implementation of bold and prudent economic measures. By April 2019, we had successfully as a country completed the 4-year IMF program. We did so and more by achieving an annual average real growth, GDP growth of 7% between 2017 and 2019 from 3.4% in 2016, maintaining a fiscal deficit below 5% of GDP for 3 consecutive years, maintaining a positive primary balance for 3 consecutive years, which put our debt on a sustainable path, lowering lending rates by over primary balance for 3 consecutive years, which put our debt on a sustainable path, lowering lending rates by over 10 percentage points, restructuring the banking sector to protect the savings of 4.6 million depositors, and strengthening the financial sector. So far, government has spent over $25 billion since 2018 to clean up the financial sector, reducing inflation from 15.4% in December 2016 to 7.6% in 2019, and preserving the integrity of the local industry. Improving gross international reserves to reach $8.6 billion, or about 4 months of import cover by 2020. Introducing the most ambitious social welfare policy ever seen in our country, the Free SHS program. Constructing and rehabilitating more roads, cumulative of about 6,250 kilometers, completing 6 of 11 interchanges and flyovers, more than any other government in our history. Employ more new teachers, nurses, doctors, agri extension officers, and young graduates than any government in our history. Saving the entire financial sector from inherited, neglected crisis that has cost government some $25 billion so far. Instigating more value for money audits on public procurements than any government in our history, and investing more resources in the police. The devastation unleashed by COVID-19, and it is the same can-do and will-do attitude that gives us hope that we will overcome the current crisis. We are not a people to bow to the spirit of despondency and despair. As well as threatening global peace, the war in Ukraine has had far-reaching impact. We do not know how long the conflict will last, but it is clear that it has already forced many countries in Europe and beyond to adjust their economic plans for 2022, and Africa is likely to be amongst the worst hit outside of Ukraine. UNCTAD's rapid assessment of the war's impact on trade and development shows a rapidly worsening outlook for the world economy, with the situation especially alarming for African countries. The Russia-Ukraine war has also compounded the global supply chain and trade disruptions brought about by COVID-19 pandemic, as well as adversely impacted the dreaded 3 Fs: food security, fuel price escalation, and financing conditions. That's impacting living conditions with the capacity to derail global recovery efforts in 2022 and beyond. Global inflation trending upwards has led to central banks raising interest rates globally, resulting in tight financing conditions and reversal of capital inflows, especially to emerging markets. For example, the U.S. Federal Reserve Bank announced a hike in interest rates by 0.25 percentage points on 16 March and has signaled more of such to follow. Similarly, the Bank of England has raised its policy rate by another 25 basis points to 0.75% on 17 March 2022. We've seen the highest inflation in US, UK, Germany, and other advanced countries since 1974. The US's inflation increased by 6.5 percentage points from 1.4% in January 2022 to 7.9% in February 2022. Similarly, inflation in Germany increased by 4.1 percentage points from 1% in January 2022 to 5.1% in February 2022. Since the COVID-19 pandemic struck, more than 60% of African sovereigns have suffered downgrades across the region. Ghana witnessed a downgrade from Fitch on 21st January 2022 to B- with a negative outlook, while Moody's downgraded Ghana to Caa1 with a stable outlook on 4 February 2022, even though S&P affirmed Ghana's rating at B- with a stable outlook on 7 February 2022. These downgrades have had implications for market access, exchange rate depreciation, capital flight, and increased cost of financing. Ladies and gentlemen, on the domestic front, the challenges include the impasse in Parliament, which is adversely affecting government business, such as the passage of some revenue bills, including the e-levy bill. This is creating uncertainty, which has been highlighted as a key risk by the rating agencies and affected our credit spreads, limiting our access to the international capital markets. The adverse global developments are impacting severely on exchange rate depreciation and domestic inflation as investors take refuge in safer assets by stocking up on the dollar, which is considered the safest currency to hold. The cedi has not been spared. Cumulatively, our local currency has depreciated by 15.6% against the US dollar and 13.4% and 13.3% respectively against the pound sterling and euro in the year to 23rd March 2022. This understandably is causing a lot of anxiety among our traders and consumers alike. However, we also need to recognize that in spite of it all, the cedi has held under these extreme challenges better than it did between 2014 and 2015. This is because the fundamentals. However, we also need to recognize that in spite of it all, the cedi has held under these extreme challenges better than it did between 2014 and 2015. This is because the fundamentals are much stronger. The Bank of Ghana has announced measures to address the exchange rate depreciation, and we believe in the propriety of the measures they outlined on Monday. The rising international price of crude oil and the exchange rate depreciation are affecting the ex-pump prices of fuel domestically as it feeds into high transportation fares and hence inflation. For example, the average ex-pump price of diesel for 3 OMCs, Goil, Total, and Vivo increased by 59.7% from 6.7 cedis per liter on 1st January 2022 to 10.7 cedis per liter by the 21st of March 2022. Ghana is not alone here. From Angola and Malawi through Nigeria and Rwanda to Senegal down to Zimbabwe, fuel prices are soaring. Some neighboring countries are not only dealing with rising petrol prices, but also scarcity on petroleum products, leading to long queues at filling stations. It remains the case, however, that one of the biggest drivers of price increases in goods and services in Ghana is fuel price hike. Inflation has surged to 15.7% at the end of February 2022. Food inflation increased from 12.8% in December 2021 to 17.4% in February 2022, while non-food inflation rose from 12.5% to 14.5% over the same period. Ladies and gentlemen, provisional data on the stock of debt as at the end of December 2021 show that the stock of public debt increased to 351.8 billion, 80.1% of GDP, compared with 218.2 billion, 61.2% of GDP at the end of 2022 before the pandemic. Of the total debt stock, domestic debt was 181.8 billion, 51.7%, while the external debt was 170 billion, 48.3%. Ladies and gentlemen, the global and domestic developments I've outlined above are affecting the effective implementation of the budget. Urgent and decisive actions are therefore required to address the challenges and ensure the achievements of the objectives and targets of the 2022 budget, including unleashing the entrepreneurial verve of the Ghanaian youth. Whilst we are in the process of revising the 2022 fiscal framework to reflect current developments with a view to go to Parliament to seek approval for the revisions during the mid-year review in July, government will pursue additional measures to ensure the achievement of the fiscal deficit target of 7.4% of GDP. Ladies and gentlemen, government had already started the new year with spending cuts as Parliament failed to approve key revenue streams at the appropriate time. In January 2022, government announced and immediately began implementing a 20% expenditure cut as part of fiscal stabilization and debt sustainability measures. This has been done through the quarterly expenditure ceiling allotment to MDAs. Quarter 1 allotment is currently in implementation, whilst Quarter 2 allotment will be issued shortly. The Ministry has strengthened its expenditure monitoring systems and processes to ensure effective implementation of these measures. In addition, government has decided to take the following measures to ensure the achievement of the fiscal deficit target of 7.4% of GDP for 2022. So, expenditure cutting measures. Discretionary spending is to be further cut by an additional 10%. The Ministry of Finance is currently meeting with MDAs to review their spending plans for the rest of the 3 quarters to achieve the discretionary expenditure cuts. 2, these times call for very efficient use of energy resources. In line with this, there will be a 50% cut in fuel coupon allocations for all political appointees and heads of government institutions, including SOEs, effective 1st February 2022. With immediate effect, government has imposed a complete moratorium on the purchase of imported vehicles for the rest of the year. This will affect all new orders, especially four-wheel drives. We will ensure that the overall effect is to reduce total vehicle purchases by the public sector by at least 50% for the period. Again, with immediate effect, government has imposed a moratorium on all foreign travels except pre-approved critical statutory travels. 5, government will conclude on ongoing measures to eliminate ghost workers from the government payroll by end December 2022. Government will conclude the renegotiations of the energy sector IPP's capacity charges by end of quarter 3 2022 to further reduce excess capacity payments by 20% to generate a total savings of 1.5 billion Ghana cedis. We will impose a moratorium on establishment of new public sector institutions by end of April 2022. Prioritize ongoing public projects over new projects. This is to enhance the efficient use of limited public funds over the period by finishing ongoing or stalled but approved projects. Reduce expenditure on all meetings and conferences by 50% effective immediately. Pursue a comprehensive reprofiling strategies to reduce the interest expense burden on the fiscal, and liaise with organized labor and employers association to implement with immediate effect the measures captured in the Kwao Declaration of the 2022 National Labour Conference, including reforms towards addressing salary inequities, inequalities, example Article 71, office holders. The weak link between pay to productivity and sustainability of the payroll. Let me say this. President Akufo-Addo has absolutely no intention to roll back on any major policy like the free SHS. We see education as the best enabler for sustainable economic growth and transformation and social mobility, and will do more to improve on it for it to serve more and better our children. Ladies and gentlemen, in addition, and finally, government approved the ministers and the heads of SOEs to contribute to cut 30% of their salaries from April to December 2022 to the Consolidated Fund. We would like to thank the Council of State in their leadership in complementing the government policy on this. All of these measures, ladies and gentlemen, are aimed at ensuring that we achieve the 7.4 deficit target set in the 2022 budget. Fuel price mitigation measures. Ladies and gentlemen, the rising prices of fuel at the pumps is influenced largely by the rising crude oil price on the international market and the exchange rate depreciation. Though the rise in crude oil prices should have been to our benefit on net basis, Ghana's import of petroleum products amounts to 5.2 times the value of proceeds from its crude oil exports. In 2021, for example, we exported $3.947 billion of crude, of which Ghana's portion was $513 million. However, we imported $2,719 of crude and finished products. So the purported windfall gain in foreign exchange is quite a mirage. From January to date, the average export price of diesel and petrol have increased by 57% and 45% respectively. Unlike in other countries where the hike in crude oil prices and exchange rate volatility are leading to shortages in supply of petroleum products, government is implementing measures to guarantee constant supply of petroleum products. To mitigate the impact of the rising price of petroleum products at the pump for the next 3 months, government has decided to reduce margins in petroleum price build-up by a total of 15 pesos per litre with effect from 1st April. The details are as follows. Bus margin reduced by 2 pesos per litre, Unified Petroleum Pricing Fund margin reduced by 9 pesos per litre, fuel marking margin reduced by 1 peso per litre, primary distribution margin reduced by 3 pesos per litre. Ladies and gentlemen, these reductions in margins are expected to reduce prices of petrol by 1.6% and diesel by 1.4%. We anticipate that the measures of export price increase by ensuring that the Bank of Ghana has access to adequate foreign exchange to support this. Revenue measures. Ladies and gentlemen, cutting down on expenditures alone will not be enough. Our focus is therefore twofold: to control expenditure and to raise more revenue domestically. As such, we will therefore begin the implementation and collection of the revised property rate by end of April 2022. We will implement the e-VAT, e-commerce, and e-gaming initiatives by end of April 2022. We will roll out a simplified tax filing mobile application for all eligible taxpayers by July 2022. We will impress upon Parliament to fast-track the passage of the e-levy bill, tax exemptions bill, and fees and charges bill. Prioritize the revenue assurance compliance and enforcement program, the RACE program, to plug revenue leakages, especially at the ports, the infamous fuel bunkering cartels, and small-scale mining exporters cabal. Government will partner the private sector to also introduce digital systems to monitor quarrying, sand winning, and salt winning to get more revenue from our natural resources. And immediately enforce the no duty, no exit policy at the MPS terminal at the Tema port to improve revenue collection. Ladies and gentlemen, Government of Ghana is to conclude external financing arrangement of up to $2 billion in the next 2 to 6 weeks in line with approved external financing for 2022 and for liability management and to manage the slide of the city. MOF, Ministry of Finance, will also work with the Central Bank to review the foreign exchange retention policy in line with approved external financing for 2022 and for liability management. Additionally, the following measures will be implemented over the medium term: wean off public tertiary institutions from government payroll and provide them with a fixed amount block grant instead. Pursue reforms to address structural challenges in public financial management, including procurement and commitment control, payroll management, and human resource management. It is too early, ladies and gentlemen, to say the COVID-19 pandemic is over, but it is good to acknowledge that Ghana has handled it excellently. We have emerged from its deadliest and most economically damaging phase. If the measures we have outlined in our economic recovery program are executed as planned, the Ghanaian economy should return to pre-pandemic levels across most economic indicators by the end of the year. On the other major event driving the global economy, we recognize that the world is 4 weeks into this terrible war, and it is quite clear that both the occupation of Ukraine and the range of sanctions imposed on Russia will have profound effects both in the short and long term for global markets. The longer the conflict goes on, the greater will be the disruption to the global economy. We shall continue to monitor the situation very closely and make further adjustments if and when needed. We may have no control of the trajectory of the conflict, but it only reminds us how necessary it is for Ghanaians to assert greater control over our own destiny. That we can do if we share in the sacrifices before us to strengthen our capacity for greater self-reliance even in this interdependent world. Government remains optimistic that the economy will grow even bigger this year. The challenge now is to marshal this economic growth before us in the right direction and ensure that it benefits Ghanaians across the board. Ladies and gentlemen, we are confident that these measures will address the immediate and short-term challenges confronting our nation. Government remains resolute and committed to entrenching the structural transformation of our economy in the long term. To this end, we are aggressively pursuing key interventions such as 1D, 1F, Ghana Cares, and the U-Start programs to improve our ability to locally produce more goods and optimize the opportunities AFCFTA offers us. It is important that as a country, we reduce our dependence on imports and increase local production. Public institutions are reminded of government's policy to buy locally produced goods. It is critical that Ghanaians reconsider their preference and consume more locally produced goods to support the economy and guarantee decent jobs for our people. Ladies and gentlemen, your government, the Akufo-Addo administration, is determined to turn things around and has the skills, discipline, and compassion to do so. But to do so, we must not allow our fortunes to be misdirected by speculators and naysayers, those who only thrive when we allow avoidable uncertainties to hold sway in the affairs of the nation. I pray that peace be within the walls of Parliament and sobriety within its towers as we go back to Parliament to introduce our revenue bills. Ladies and gentlemen, these measures outlined today will significantly improve the macro-fiscal situation towards a restoration of confidence and safeguard the achievement of the 2022 budget deficit target of 7.4% of the GDP. These measures have been carefully designed to ensure that growth and spending on social protection are, however, not compromise. Ladies and gentlemen, these are truly challenging times globally. No country has been spared. Government therefore calls on all Ghanaians to stand together. Together we shall surely overcome. Ladies and gentlemen, the people of Ghana, we can do it together. This is not the first time an MPP government working together with the people of Ghana has succeeded in overcoming an economic challenge of this nature. We have demonstrated time and time again our ability to overcome with you. First, in 2001, the MPP government, led by former President Kufuor, together with the people of Ghana, brought the country out of severe economic difficulties. Second, in 2017, the MPP government, led by President Nana Dankwa Akufo-Addo, together with the people of Ghana, brought the country out of the economic doldrums in which we were at the end of 2016. This third time, still under President Akufo-Addo, working together with the people of Ghana, will not be an exception. Ladies and gentlemen, I've had the privilege of engaging in a number of town hall meetings from Koforidua to Takoradi, to Tamale, to Wa and Ho, and the resolve of our people to burden share for a better life for all of us is palpable. In particular, they want everyone to pay taxes. They want government to be accessible. They want Parliament to get on with its work. They want employment for our youth. They want agriculture and industry to thrive. They want government to cut its coat. They want us to tackle our debt problem and raise more revenue and to prosecute offenders. Ladies and gentlemen, our media review will reveal the successes of what we have done. This would ensure that the structural reforms are crystallized, reduce fiscal dominance during this period, and ensure fiscal and monetary policy coherence. Let me end by a quotation from Jeremiah. Let us seek, all of us, the peace and prosperity of our nation. Let's pray to the Lord for it, because if it prospers, you too will prosper. Together, we will confront the macroeconomic challenges head on, stabilize the economy, and set it on the path of economic transformation for all. So yes, we'll bring in additional $1 to $2 billion to stabilize the slide of the currency. We have enumerated a number of issues to ensure expenditure cuts, and we have put in place strategies to ensure that we have the supply of fuel that is required and maintain and stabilize the increases. But let us also remember that this is a global phenomenon in which we are part of, but we can and we will overcome. God bless our homeland, Ghana. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Honorable Minister. And as Honorable Minister resumes his seat, it's a good time to get ready to take your questions. Can I get an indication where the microphone is? Can I get an indication where the microphone is? Thank you. So it's a good time to take your questions. There are a number of things the Minister has spoken to, dealing with the fiscal threats, revenue side, and then expenditure side, in particular the expenditure cut.
And that was the Finance Minister, Ken Ofori-Atta, there addressing the nation and giving us an indication of some very important measures that will be implemented and will be reviewed by the middle of the year. And I'll be giving you a brief of that. We will certainly go back for the questions and answers. I'm joined by my colleague, Alfred Okanse, as well for this special coverage. Thanks for staying with us. But significantly, measures announced. Discretionary budget will be cut, 50% cut in fuel coupons. There's a moratorium on the purchase of new vehicles as well as importation. Moratorium on foreign travels except for those approved of and deemed critical. There's also excess capacity on payments for energy that should be completed by end of Q4 2022. Moratorium on public sector workers institutions employing more people and also for new sections of those institutions. He indicated clearly that government's free SHS remains untouched. The government considers this as one of the most important items that can propel the country for development, and so there is no intention to roll back on that specific intervention. In terms of fuel, the finance minister announced as much as 15 pesos reduction per litre. That comes to 60 pesos reduction on litre, a reduction of 2 pesos on the bus margin, a reduction of 9 pesos on the Unified Petrol Fund, also 1 pesos removed from fuel marking, 3 pesos removed from the primary distribution margin. He estimates that 1.6% reduction in petrol and a 1.4% reduction in diesel, and ultimately all of this should bring down the current ex-pump price, which is somewhere between 9 and 10%. Alfred, you've also been monitoring the other interventions.
Indeed.
He says they'll also have some revenue measures.
Absolutely, and they talked about some of the loans that government intends to take, and then the revised property rates. And this was captured in the 2022 budget. It is about the execution and implementation of these policies that we're still waiting to see, because some of the measures that he talked about in terms of revenue generation are not really new. If you look at the 2022 budget, they are captured in there. Property rates have always been one of the areas that finance ministers gone by and president have always touched on as to why we're still struggling with that particular challenge when we have now digitized the process of property identification. It's also a question that obviously needs a lot of answers, especially from the Ghana Revenue Authority. We know that they are set to be instituting measures in place to be able to address this particular problem. But we are already ending the first quarter of the year. We should be seeing something. So these are some of the areas that he talks about. But if you look at the earlier ones that you talked about, cutting down expenditure, because obviously this is simple accounting. If you are in a crisis situation, you cut down your expenditure to be able to, as it were, rake in some revenue if you are not getting enough revenue. If you talk about 50% cut in fuel coupons has become one of the major talking points in this crisis situation. There should be an explanation and justification as to why, there still government needs to be issuing, or as it were, giving fuel coupons to its appointees. Recommendations have been made that it should have been scrapped totally, so that we are talking about burden sharing, right? The government appointees or people who are beneficiaries of the fuel coupon. Bear in mind, these fuel coupons are financed by the taxpayer. The GOIL fuel coupons that are given, we are paying for it. Okay, so if you give the fuel coupons out to these appointees and they are not feeling the pinch of the increase in petroleum prices at the pumps, it becomes a real issue of concern, because when the Ghanaian people are complaining, there's that sense of disconnect, because then the people, the appointees, are not directly connected and they do not feel that much of an impact when it comes to fuel price increases. Now we are talking, and he acknowledges the fuel price increases between January and to date as we speak.
There have been 10 of them.
10 of them.
Okay, but I don't want us to dig deep yet into the deep analysis. I just wanted us to give people a high point of what had been announced, because it's easy to miss some of them. So for instance, on revenue measures, they'll revise the property rates, collections, the e-commerce and e-gaming initiatives will also be kick in. There'll be a mobile process for tax collection for each and every one of us. There's the focus on pushing the e-levy bill, and also ensuring that there is no duty, no exit policy at the Tema port, and I dare say at all the ports of entry. There will be the injection of some $2 billion into the economy. The Ministry of Finance will work with the central bank to ensure the implementation of the exchange rate retention policy, and of course wean off public sector institutions in terms of some of the salaries that they are paid. That will be an interesting one to interrogate later on. All right, so the finance minister has started answering some of the questions. Let's take that and we'll come back to studio. We are live on TV3 and 3FM.
Indication that prices were going to go up. And is there room to introduce some subsidies on energy prices? There's a second question from GNA. Can we look at deepening domestic refining of petroleum products so that in terms of sources, we have local sources that could translate into some cheaper products for us. And in addition to the already existent contingency funds in Ghana's budget, do we think we need to increase our contingency funding here in Ghana's budgets? There's another question. Won't the cuts affect money in circulation? And I added to it economic activity and the prospects of growth, with Nanekw's permission. And then the final question, who will assure compliance to these measures? And does it affect civil servants as well? Minister.
Thank you very much indeed, and thanks for the questions. Yes, we do have a committee, at the ministry to follow through on these cuts that we have talked about, and I think I might have even mentioned it in the speech. So yes, we do. The cuts, just to allay the fears of the 700,000 civil servants and public servants, has to do with political appointees, including SOEs, etc. Because it's really an issue of setting the example, and I think it's important, especially given the lack of control we'll have international crude oil pricing, that even as we make these bold moves, I think corporates individually in the country should also begin to look at their usage of petrol in a way in which you recognize that this problem is a problem for the Republic and it's international. And I think that's important. And so we really commend the Council of State when they also joined us to cut down their salaries by 20% going forward. But I think for most corporates and Ghanaians, now being more austere about how we use petroleum products, it's going to be important for all of us as a nation. As I mentioned, we are a net importer of petrol, of fuel, and it's almost like a 1 to 5.2 ratio, so that the increase in petrol affects us, in crude prices affects us, more than what we gain. Opportunity that we had with regards to the potential to hedge, those analyses are constantly being. We expected to gain about 3 billion cedis for the year, and when you are running a budget deficit and you begin to think of more subsidies, that will be the cost to you as a nation as you do that. So we have to be very prudent about what we do about extra subsidies. Domestic refining capacity, I know that the Ministry of Energy and TOR are working on various plans to see how we can build a new refinery, either private sector or PPP, etc. So that certainly is an appropriate idea to be shared. With regards to savings, in terms of our initial calculations of all of that, will be about 3.5 billion Ghana cedis that we expect to be able to save. But we'll keep titrating and tightening it and ensure that we get as much from that as possible. The contingency funds that was mentioned, good idea, but you really need, we already have our heritage funds, etc. And at this juncture, with the crisis, there's very little to add on to. But certainly, we're always looking for ways in which you can build stock for the future. And so that would be done. I don't know, Kojo, is that
yes, Minister,
coverage?
I have a sense that the key issues have been tackled. We'll take a second round of questions. Yes, I think there was, Yes, there was only one that is yet to be responded to. One, that cuts affect money in circulation and economic activity and the prospect of growth.
Well, the question that I guess we have to ask ourselves as a nation, and therefore whether the cost of runaway inflation, what we are experiencing with our currency, and what that will trigger into. And so when you look at Bank of Ghana's measures, it's really to contain inflation, tighten our belts, and not sort of chase up the depreciation of the currency. But there are times in any nation's life in which these decisions have to be made. Difficult times, but if we don't do that, we'll spiral into an arena that we really do not want. So yes, it will bring some tightening, but when you don't have resources and the markets or the global market moves against you, we then have to readjust the way in which we spend things, and within that that band of resources, we should be able to do. I mean, note that even last year, from a 0.4% growth in 2020, in 2021, we were able to grow by an average of 5.2%. And the third quarter, as I mentioned, was amazing at 6.6%. So we need to be very deliberate in how we support, the areas in the real sector that would generate the growth and cut down on overheads in governments. Thank you.
Minister, grateful. We're going to take a second batch of questions. We will be biased towards the ladies as we start. Yes, madam. Yes, madam. And then I'll go to the two gentlemen at the back. That will make 4 for this round. There are 2 gentlemen here, yourself and then yourself. I'll give you priority in the next round. So, madam, let's start with you. Not more than 2 questions so that we can hear from more people.
My name is Abin, and I report for the Chronicle newspaper. And Minister, you spoke of returning to Parliament with regards to the e-levy. I want to know what assurance you have that it will be passed this time around. Thank you.
Thank you. Blessed assurance.
My name is Nettie from City TV. Minister, please, we want to know how much was spent on fuel funds in a year so that we can appreciate the 6% reduction that the government is proposing. And also, how much is the government expected to see from all these cuts and measures put in place to
Okay, thank you. Nettie, I think the second one was answered already in the first round of questions. But Minister, the question is, can you disaggregate, for example, fuel and other things here and now for us? If you can, we'll be happy to. Yes, sir.
Yes. Christian. Would like to
Christian from which media house?
GNA and Reuters.
Please go ahead.
Yes.